This is a recording with my very good friend, Cameron John Robbins, the gentleman artist. And what we're proposing to do here is going to look through a series of portraits of historical figures as painted by the great man himself. And I will give my indications of what I see in a face. We will look both at the portraits, and I will put some images then of those particular individuals beside them. And we'll discuss from both our perspectives and see where the lines meet. So, Cameron, it's over to you. I'm going to start sharing the screen, and we'll choose the first image.
Okay. Very interesting. Martin Luther King Jr. Another one that I did for my imaginary board of directors, another complicated historical personality, heavily inspired himself by Gandhi. Lots of positive things that could be said about him, some negative things could be said about him, but to the best of my understanding, he lived authentically to his beliefs. If nothing else, that deserves admiration. But he made very impressive contributions to obviously the civil liberties of African Americans, but expanding out to everyone. I mean, if any group of people is oppressed on any basis, all of humanity suffers. It's disturbing in our modern political climate that this is no longer taught in school, because when I grew up, we learned his "I Have a Dream" speech by heart, and one of the most brilliant speeches ever delivered, and his emphasis on transcending seeing skin color and judging each other on character is one of the most profound exhortations to all of humanity that I've ever heard. And we're moving away from that as societies at our peril.
Just on the speech itself, obviously, he's best known for giving that speech at the March on Washington in August 63. It was August 63, wasn't it? Yes. But it almost didn't happen. You know that the committee of which he was one were deciding on the order of the speeches and the content. And it was decided by the committee that the "I Have a Dream" component of his speech was too trite. And it was only when he was giving the speech, and his speech was going over reasonably well, but it wasn't quite that special. But the gospel singer Mahalia Jackson was sitting near him and leaned forward and said, tell them about the dream. And it was only when he heard that and he went into "I Have a Dream," then it really took off. But it almost didn't happen. So it's a reminder to be careful about letting committees make a decision.
Oh, absolutely. Especially when you feel so strongly about an idea.
Yeah.
One other point of trivia about that event, excuse me, I learned from a friend of mine that he finished writing that speech in the Willard Hotel in Washington, D.C., which is right on the National Mall, right near the Lincoln Memorial from which he gave the speech. And so it's an interesting experience to stand in places where such pivotal historical events happened, because on one level it's just another room, it's just another building, it's just another spot in a city, and yet when you find out this is where Lincoln was shot, this is where Dr. King finished that speech, that's where he delivered that speech, and so on and so forth.
Yeah,
it changes the way you feel about the place.
absolutely. So I'm just going to bring up a couple of things here. Again, Martin Luther King was quite a diminutive figure. He was only about 5'6". And again, we think of people like that of being almost gigantic stature because of the impact they've had. But he was a relatively small man, yet his voice carried so much power. Of course, he was a pastor. He was well accustomed to speaking in church and being an orator. So he knew how to command an
making his voice
audience.
carry.
Yeah, oh, absolutely, absolutely. Again, similar to some others, you note that dip around the bridge of the nose. So he wanted any meeting to have a purpose. You don't just meet to meet. You meet to decide on something and to plan and to take action. So again, this is sort of a tutorial. So if you meet somebody with that feature, you're meeting for a purpose, not
Get
to just
straight to the
hang out.
point.
And also then you notice the way the nose sort of flares out again.
Mm-hmm.
You have a meeting, you decide, you take action, and then you go. You do not dawdle, you do not hang out waiting to decide. You made a decision and you go and you take action. And if somebody's nose flares out like that and you're working with them, they expect you to keep up because they want to move ahead fast. They want progress. I'm going to use this as again an illustration of something. You notice his lower lip is very puffy. Now there is a misconception that people of African or African American origin automatically have very puffy lower lips, which is not necessarily true. But his is actually quite puffy, and it indicates that there was actually intestinal weakness there. And in modern day terms, we know there's a huge amount of research into the gut microbiome brain connection. So again, if you're seeing this on somebody where there's actual swelling and puffiness of the lower lip, it indicates that there's a weakness in terms of peristaltic motion of the gut, and there's a tendency to hold on to excess material, which will also have an impact on the ability to think clearly and process thought clearly. So not to give you the wrong image about Martin Luther King, because unfortunately at those times, and he wasn't exactly a wealthy figure.
No.
Plus he was on the move a lot, so his diet would not have been the healthiest anyway. And in those days in America, there were a lot of restrictions. But certainly his gut health would have been impacted by lifestyle as well. And obviously in terms of how he expressed himself, he obviously transcended a lot of that potential weakness. So I'm kind of going off in two different directions there at the same time with that one.
It makes an interesting point because of how accomplished he was and how brilliant he was. How much more brilliant might he have been if his microbiome was in better health?
Yeah.
We'll never know. But yeah, so it's not to dismiss or diminish how intelligent he was.
Absolutely.
It's more to indicate that like that's how good he was at half speed. Imagine if he was at full speed.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.